Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Edith Kirmani, where is she? Over there. A lovely introduction yesterday. She taught us how to socialize better and say hello to one another. Thank you very much. An inspiration. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Director General, ladies and gentlemen, it's a rare opportunity today for me to exercise my freedom of speech, encouraged by the event and by the remarks I heard yesterday. And I'm very honored to be among this distinguished gathering, global media gathering. And thankful for the opportunity, sir. And in a country so close to our hearts in Afghanistan, in the long history of friendship between our two countries, Germany has always been steadfast by our side. In particular, from the Bonn Conference of 2001 to today, Germany has stood by us as a frontline state in support of our reconstruction and development. In other words, a great contributor to Afghanistan and wishes for us well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, from the end of the Cold War emerged a different perspective, one of a new world order. Some thought a hyperpower would arise, ushering in, for the rest of us, a world order with new rules befitting the needs of the time. That didn't happen. Rather, after a short interlude, the images of a multi-centric world began to show. The rise of China and of India and the reassertion of Russia are critical and instructive developments. Europe, too, by the fact of new circumstances, is moving in the direction of a new definition of interests. And in this environment, when multipolarity leads to multilateral action among key powers that shape the world, we hope very much that seeds of a new and more constructive world would emerge. But in the midst of all this, ladies and gentlemen, generally the country most spoken about, the United States, decision-making over several decades, foreign policy decision-making over several decades, has been a give and take between unilateralism and interventionism, especially in the past 2 decades, leading to negative consequences for some and to discord among long-term strategic allies. I submit that wherever we look today, with the exception of this morning on the Korean Peninsula, which we hope will be lasting and for the good of all, we see the United States fumbling through regions in ways that make them worse. The invasion of Iraq in 2003, on what we now know were trumped-up charges. Iraq had no nuclear weapons, turning it into a cesspool of extremism and sectarianism, giving rise to dangerous entities like Daesh, was not simply a strategic mistake. It was ill-advised, bad policy. Disbanding the Ba'ath Party, throwing hundreds of thousands of educated and military personnel onto the streets, and bringing about the destruction of the Iraqi state's infrastructure. The message that the 2003 invasion sent to everyone else was, if you can manage to have nuclear weapons, have them, don't give them up, or you will face the situation in Iraq or probably even Libya, which thought had launched a big deal for the preservation of the state of Libya. Yet again, unfortunately, blatant, illegal intervention and invasion of Libya turned that stable country, for all the faults that it had. Iraq, the Iraqi government, the secular government, had many faults. Abusive, oppressive, but it was a stable country. So did Libya. For all the fault it had, was a very, very stable country. Now, it is a war zone of sectarianism, and Daesh has again emerged there. Worst of all, looks like we learned nothing from those two countries. The case of Syria is such a sorry story. That ancient civilization, that lovely country, turned into the battleground for all, with massive destruction. When I see television images of Syria, I get as hurt feeling down and depressed as I feel about my own country when I see destruction there. But those mistakes were made, and an ancient civilization turned to rubbles. And on top of all that, the recent unilateral withdrawal of the United States from the Iran deal, which ushered in a new hope of a relationship between the Middle East and the West, which we hoped would also usher in a new era for Iran, has turned the whole thing into uncertainty and new dangers. Ladies and gentlemen, Iran is a neighbor of Afghanistan and a close neighbor of Afghanistan. We don't want the cancellation of deals between Iran and the rest of the world, the United States in particular, to impact us negatively. We are neighbors, and we want to continue our good neighborly relationships. And we want the dynamics, indeed, towards Iran and the Iran deal to develop differently towards positive. And we hope that this deal will be renewed, keeping in mind the interests of all, including that of Europe, which has opposed the cancellation of it, which we, as people from that part of the world, appreciate. I hope that all these mistakes were with good intentions, because that takes us away from cynicism. But as we know, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's what we should be avoiding in international relations, where internationalist altruism plays a role that makes things worse for us rather than better for us. This is the template, unfortunately, today on which the world operates. Chaos and more chaos and increasing chaos. That's encouraged by technology. When I say encouraged by technology, it is the use of technology in warfare. Drones, for example. We're sitting in this room, a drone may come from somewhere, we don't hear the noise, we don't hear the engine sound, it can listen to us, it can shoot at us. You don't feel it perhaps in Germany or in Europe. We do feel it on an everyday basis in Afghanistan and in the Middle East. So technology does that to us in an unfortunate way. And also, sometimes the fanaticism of the well-intentioned makes things worse for us, as we have seen the examples before. This brings us to my own country, Afghanistan. My country, Afghanistan, somehow or the other, for the last 3 centuries, has been in the middle of big power rivalry, to which some often referred as the Great Game. Then played in our part of the world between Great Britain, a colonial power, and the Tsarist Russia, another great power, to which the 19th century Russian Foreign Minister, Count Nisseldorf, referred to in most beautiful words, the tournament of shadows. It was this tournament of shadows that caused Afghanistan by the fact of its circumstances to be a player and a victim. And unfortunately, the victimhood of Afghanistan continues till today. For Afghanistan, the tragedy of September 11 brought a sudden and massive change. The US and its allies, backed by the UN and major powers in our region and our neighbors, and welcomed very much by the Afghan people, arrived with hopes for us in Afghanistan for change and success and achievement, and definitely much greater hope towards the future. Yes, we did have achievements. We did improve our lives. The country became better off. Economy was better. Education for women were better. Rights somehow were better. Democracy came. Freedom of the press came. And many countries helped, from the United States to Germany, to Japan, to our neighborhood, to Russia, to China, and to the Muslim world. However, for all that good that happened in Afghanistan, for which we are very, very grateful to our allies and friends, however, the prolongation of war and the absence of results and the absence of the clarity of purpose have not only added to the suffering of the Afghan people in terms of insecurity and the continuation of conflict, but have also caused suspicions among big powers and the neighbors of Afghanistan and the Afghan people of the intentions of the United States in Afghanistan and its presence there. It's a long story. If I go to describing it, it will take forever. So I will cut it short and go to how to rectify the situation. It is imperative today, ladies and gentlemen, that the United States regain the confidence of all the stakeholders in our part of the world and internationally, and in particular to regain the confidence of the Afghan people through a new compact with the Afghan people and through a new understanding with the major international stakeholders. Here, Russia, China, India, and Iran are prominent powers in the region and relevant to the conflict that can make a long-term contribution to peace and stability in Afghanistan. These powers, we hope, will act together to deal with terrorist violence that threatens our common stability. The US, ladies and gentlemen, we hope will begin to act in tandem with these stakeholders to fabricate and design a new peace model. And in a multilateral world, it is best and in the interest of all to reach out across divides and political frontiers for the sake of peace and stability. In my view, it is clear that success will not come to us unless the following conditions are met. One, Afghanistan regains ownership of its own processes and has sovereignty over its affairs, with particular emphasis on holding free and fair elections and the convening of the traditional Loya Jirga. Those of you who are not familiar with Afghanistan or our history may wonder, what is a Loya Jirga? A Loya Jirga means a Grand Council. This was the body, especially relevant to our German and European audience, that made Afghanistan neutral during the Second World War. When the Allied forces tried to force Afghanistan to deliver German citizens living in Afghanistan to them in 1940, the Afghan king, a wise man at the time, called the Loya Jirga of the Afghan people, or the Grand Council of the Afghan people, to decide the matter. The Grand Council decided that Afghanistan will remain neutral and not be party to the conflict between the fighting sides, and that Afghanistan will never deliver German citizens to the Allied forces. Rather, the German citizens will be delivered back to Germany in absolute safety and security, or given Afghan citizenship if they decided to stay there. So it's an extremely important body that decides on vital issues. Two, the development of a new security mechanism through collaboration between major international and regional actors, so that Afghanistan once again is seen as a place of cooperation rather than confrontation. Because the idea of a military solution is now more unthinkable than ever before. Peace will come only when the Afghans are truly in charge of the peace process and of the intra-Afghan dialogue. And this can happen only when the US and our neighbor, Pakistan, genuinely and sincerely support the efforts, and when their other neighbors and stakeholders are on board to offer facilitation where they can. Decades of the use of extremism as an instrument of policy is indeed at the root of our suffering in Afghanistan. Pakistan, our good neighbor, we hope will finally recognize the danger and join hands with us in addressing this issue and all other issues affecting our two countries. To the people of Pakistan, who have suffered at the hands of violent extremism as much as we have in Afghanistan, and also because of the short-sightedness of their own government's policies, the Afghan people are immensely grateful for decades of hospitality given by the people of Pakistan to our people for decades and decades. Ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan wants to be a place of international and regional cooperation, as I mentioned earlier, rather than confrontation. During my own time in office, when there was heavy US and NATO presence in Afghanistan, my government promoted and implemented, under difficult circumstances, a policy of friendship and partnership with all the stakeholders. This brought us considerable stability and reconstruction assistance. Afghanistan urgently needs to return to a similar policy. Our people continued to seek close relations with all our neighbors and the broader region. But how do we get there? How do we make Afghanistan once again a place of cooperation? And how do we regain a relationship with our neighbors, especially with Pakistan, where all sides, and especially the two sides of Pakistan and Afghanistan, are in a win-win situation? This brings me back to Germany. This brings me back to the Bonn Conference and to the town of Bonn. Those of you who remember, the new life or the new beginning in Afghanistan was framed during a famous international conference in Bonn, facilitated by Germany, through the good offices of Germany, and participated by the entire international community and our neighbors. This was in 2001, that ushered in the new era for Afghanistan. I believe it is time again, ladies and gentlemen, for the good offices of Germany to be put in place again for the convention of a new, or the convening of a new Bonn conference, towards two objectives. Objective one, to facilitate beforehand an Afghan peace process. By the Afghan peace process, I mean an intra-Afghan dialogue between the Taliban and other Afghans. So we, the Afghan people, can together formulate our mechanisms for peace and put it forward for approval to the Afghan people and, of course, endorsement to the international community. Second, that we make sure that no neighbor of Afghanistan or no power in the region has any fears of an Afghanistan that is stable and peaceful, or that is in alliance with America and Europe. That mechanisms are developed for guarantees on all sides. That Pakistan guarantees non-interference in Afghanistan, and that Pakistan does not need the use of extremism anymore, that Afghanistan gives similar guarantees to Pakistan and to our other neighbors. For this to happen, another Bonn conference held in Germany, in Bonn, will be a step forward. And we hope the government of Germany will look into it and facilitate such a conference. That, we hope, with the experience that now we have gained, will bring Afghanistan to where we all wish it to be. And as we know, ladies and gentlemen, All nations, regardless of size or level of development, need to have legitimate and functioning governments. The destruction of states and the creation of stateless territories is in no one's interest, and as witnessed, would lead to chaos and negative consequences for all. The arrival in Europe recently, in the past 3-4 years, particularly in Germany, of hundreds of thousands of migrants is the direct result of the destructive intervention of some Western powers in the countries that I spoke about earlier. We have to help those countries back to stability and a way of their own life. They will not come out of their countries. They will not migrate. And this morning, I was talking with Director Limber. He spoke to me of a new plan that the Deutsche Welle and a French media service have launched, calling it Info Migrants. I hope that such information campaign will lead to more awareness in our countries back there, and will also lead to the understandings that we have of Europe and the West, and that will in turn lead to more stability for Afghanistan and other countries affected by conflict or intervention from outside. And therefore, let us hope that the new rules for international interaction will also enable countries such as Afghanistan to address the daunting challenges to their own security and development by engaging in win-win cooperation with multiple centers that seek balance rather than over-reliance on one country or one bloc. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a great believer, as the lady said, in peace and pacifism. That's why I never called myself the commander-in-chief, in spite of the urging of the American generals. They kept telling me, "Sir, you are the commander-in-chief." I would say, "No, I'm not," because I did not believe in war, especially the way they had launched it. I don't believe in it anyway. I believe the world is one family. We inhabitants of this world are all one family. We live in separate rooms, of course, in this one family, in one house. And this brings me to the beautiful words of Sadi, the great Persian poet that calls us all one world. Human beings are members of a whole, in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Very kind. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.